Greetings, friends.
My name is Steve Kelsey.
And I'm Ron Leota, and this is The Roles We Play, the show about the roles we play in the games we love. On the show today, we are talking about what scares you in gaming for our Halloween Spooktacular month. Without further ado, let's start the show.
Spooky, Spooktacular.
This is going to be an interesting one because you have on the couch today someone who is a hardcore horror and Halloween fan and somebody who is not.
Yeah, like I like Halloween fine because I love candy.
Yeah.
And you know, I do, my partner and I do we have like our little pumpkin painting or making or carving ritual depending on the year, and we enjoy like Halloween, but I don't care about horror games or horror as a genre in a broader sense. I don't like horror like a lot of people say that they don't like certain genres of music, where you could probably point to things and be like, but do you like this? It's like how a lot of people say they don't like hip hop. It's like, yeah, but do you like Outlast or Fresh Prince? And they're like, well, yeah, I like those. But
right.
and so like there's plenty of horror films I do like. But if you were saying, am I invested in the genre of horror in film, book, or especially video game? No. That's a simple answer for me. And I'm not qualifying that. I want to be that hot take. It'd be good for the YouTubes. It's like, horror games always sucked in the title. And then the anger clicking. But that's not true. They just don't hit me. They don't hit me in the soft, goopy places that they hit you in.
They definitely hit me in the soft, goopy places. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what scares me in games and what's effective.
And then I've thought about this. So I will talk about what puts me on edge in games, which is, I think, pretty close.
So I'm going to say tension built by dread-inducing atmosphere, particularly visuals and sound. I know that's super broad, but I wanted to bring up a couple of examples of things that I think are really effective and have been used across dozens of games. So obscured visuals, the most iconic of which is like the Silent Hill fog or maze-like corridors you find in castle and sci-fi games, so like Amnesia, Dead Space, Alien Isolation.
Doom.
Yeah, Doom. Anytime you get tight spaces or obscuring your vision from a distance, it's that constant fear of the unknown. And then that's just playing on a very deep fear I think people have in general is of the unknown. So if you like being scared, creating that sense of constant unknown, it can be really cool and build that tension. I would say also... this is one that's kind of a point of contention. Some people really like their horror games crystal clear and super pretty, like the modern Resident Evil games. But I really like it when graphics leave things to the imagination. This used to be like just forced because back in the early Resident Evil, early Silent Hill days, you just had hardware limitations. Yep. So it was blocky, and so the monsters looked more horrifying in a way. You go back now and you look at the first zombie you interact with in Resident Evil, in the original version, it's almost comically bad. Mm-hmm. But that in that moment back then, there was a lot of that leaving it up to the imagination. I think some of the modern indie games, also based more on sometimes based on budget, but also I think that's a distinct visual choice. A couple of really big ones are going to be Amnesia and Lone Survivor. Both of those played on that very old pixelated style of graphics, while probably reducing their budget, also making that artistic choice. Again, it's that unknowable. It's that your brain doesn't quite click that this is what people are supposed to look like. And last, I'd say making the player only able to flee has been very effective in a lot of modern horror games.
That is a very good system that I've noticed in a lot of indie modern horror playthroughs.
Yep. Outlast is really big on that.
Yeah.
As is one of the I don't know if you'd say earlier of the modern horror games, that was one of the free games, was Slender. Just finding pages. And all you can do is run away from him and you don't want to look at him. That was so effective, and there were a million jump scare YouTube videos of people playing that because it was effective.
I think what works about it the most is that it really took... this is going to unpack into such a bigger conversation. Let me keep it controlled. So video games are art.
Yes.
We know this. If you're listening to this or watching it on YouTube and you don't agree with this, feel free to comment about it. We'll have a fun time. But
Steve will get in the comments and argue.
Will get in those comments. Get in the comments. So video games are art. And along with what I like to call the emotional journey games, which is amusing because Journey would categorize itself in that category of games. True. But emotional journey games, which are less about mechanically what you're playing and more about the experience that you're having while you're doing it, and the investment that it draws you in, and the ability to empathize if you're making the thing go rather than watching or reading it. In reading, you're imagining it, and so that's your investment. In watching it, you are just receiving it. You can still empathize because we're bestial monkey creatures, mammals that want to pack bond with anything we even think could be anthropomorphized into us. But what I think really hits the spot is that in the modern era, which I will say the 2010s forward, we have really seen a lot of focus on gaming isn't the power fantasy that people thought it was, or the skill check that people thought it was, which is sort of what it was rooted in. It was either you were a badass, like Doom.
Yep.
You know, you either started weak and got to become a badass, and that was the point of the game, or you had talent and skill and could get through the level. Yeah. And now, along with a number of other emotions, one of the emotions that works really well for both sad and meaningful moments as well as terror moments, like you're saying, is pure human powerlessness. And the horror genre is perfect for that because it relates it to what it's supposed to, which is the empathy of, but what if you were a teenager in the woods at a cabin and there was a man in a mask? Or what if you, every time you fell asleep, were terrorized by a monster that actually was able to harm you? Or what if you were in Space Station that ended up being the fourth iteration of a hell cube that allowed a guy with a bunch of needles in his face, arguably the finest Hellraiser. So I don't like horror, but I have watched a lot of it. But yeah, and I love that. That was absolutely one of the things I thought about, is this, like, that move to straight, because they don't do that in the older horror games for the most part. In Resident Evil and Silent Hill, you definitely have to manage things. There are some powerless moments, and they have pieces of that through it. And Silent Hill more so than Resident Evil, but now just whole games just be like, pick up papers, run away, don't get caught.
Well, and again, this is gets into a much larger meta conversation, but I think that, again, hardware limitations back in the day really pushed people into certain types of gaming.
Exactly.
So when I hear people older gamers, complaining about, kids don't know anything these days, they don't have the skill that I had, and I'm like, yeah, but the games you played, if you could beat them from start to finish, you could do it in an hour and a half. Versus the games now where it's like people complain if you don't get a 40-hour experience out of $60.
A short game now, an indie short game now, for $5 to $10 is 4 hours of gameplay, 2 if you're really good.
Yeah.
Every Nintendo and Super Nintendo game that isn't a JRPG could easily be knocked out in an hour to an hour and a half. If you knew how to beat it, if you knew how to play the game properly, and you memorized where all of your concerns were. The only games that were like that were games like Metroid or Castlevania, where you can speed run them, but even playing through them capably usually took a little bit of time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, the Metroidvania genre, and then things like Zelda, right? That just were built to take time to navigate. But even then, you could easily beat the first Zelda in 2 hours if you knew how to play it. If you played it 100 times, which we all did. So, you know, screw that old gamer myth. That old gamer metaphor of it's like games were really hard back in the day. You couldn't save all the time.
Honestly, I'll take my super easy breezy, can't really lose games like Man of Medan that we have like a great, basically playing a horror movie.
Yeah.
I really like that Dark Pictures anthology games.
Yeah.
Now, those really border the space between film, digital film, and like video game, because you do have control, but it's very much choose your own adventure. In fact, I feel as though they hinder themselves by giving you walking sections. I know some people are going to be like, well, then it's not a video game, but at the all you're doing is creating gameplay, adding those walking sections in versus just being able to continue to experience the well-paced horror movie.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, there is certain tension about, as you were kind of talking about a little bit, physically controlling your guy walking through the space. But with some of those more like generally just feel like you're watching a horror movie that you get to choose your own adventure. I really like that part of it more than I like the walking around sections.
Of course. Telltale used to have to dance with this devil forever because it was a choose your own adventure, find things, and especially after they got to Walking Dead, where they realized that most people don't really want to have to go back and forth and figure out the one item they forgot to click on. What they want is choice and puzzles that they can solve in the moment. Your average person that isn't a super fan of like Monkey Island and stuff like that.
I want to honorable mention, but I wanted to mention something because you brought up Walking Dead. Walking Dead scared me in a way that most games don't. Nothing about Walking Dead's horror actually frightened me or really made me feel all that tense. The gore, none of that stuff is very effective. What genuinely scared me about Walking Dead was hurting Clementine. Was doing anything to hurt that little girl who had already been. This was the first game that made me care about a child in a video game. I generally think child characters are the worst in video games. Having to escort them around is the worst gameplay loop. But being Lee and being there for Clementine, that was a lot of stress. Like being like, fuck, oh no, God, what lesson am I going to teach her by taking this food I just found in the car? Obviously, the people probably just walked away from the car for a little bit, but we're starving. Am I going to make this little girl suffer and starve?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did, but no. The Walking Dead series is a good example of a different style to step a little bit away from the powerlessness and to step into an aspect of horror that's not often taken advantage of in any genre other than written, which is the horror of conscience and the horror of empathy. The true grim pit in your stomach horror, not out of fear, but out of pure dread.
And guilt sometimes.
And guilt and shame. And like, that's a real hard thing to hit in a 2-hour film. And it's a real hard thing to hit in a game where you get to make choices and do things. And that has to mechanically reward you somehow for those things. There's a bit of narrative dissonance there. But it's really easy in a written thing because you're there. Your participation is building the visuals that the world is telling you about. You're not actually making choices other than aesthetic minor choices that further relate it to yourself because you're in your own mind's imagination. So everything is going to feel comfortable to you aesthetically because that's what you're going to do. And so doing that in a video game is very difficult. But when it happens, and I'm not going to talk about specific games because that's our next episode, I believe, is games we love. And I don't want to like step over what I'm going to talk about later. But when it happens, it's amazing. I do have some things in horror. That'll be my first one of what I think makes a horror game. Correct. And everything. What I think makes for a good horror game.
Well, you mentioned that kind of very different style of dread and horror.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of games that I think are more horror games than games people call horror games.
Yeah.
I'm going to use examples of games I really enjoy. So it's not me crapping all over using a counterpoint, because I love all these games. I will sincerely say that Papers, Please and This War of Mine are more horror game than Doom will ever be.
Yep. Oh, 100%.
Doom is
jump scares at most.
Yeah, Doom is jump scares and just a testosterone fueled power fantasy. Don't get me wrong. I want to be the Doom Slayer. I want to run around and make demons afraid.
That's not horror. It's not horror.
But people call that a horror game, and it's like, because there's gory visuals and there's body horror, and so I get it. Like, that plays upon a very particular type of person who gets squeamish. I worked in a funeral home. You don't make me squeamish with video games. That is really, I don't want to say lazy horror, because it is so effective on some people. And if you do body horror right, it's very artistic and cool. I mean, look at Geiger's work.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't call it lazy so much as it's a very blunt version
of
visceral horror that isn't blunt version of visceral horror that doesn't engage anything but a reactionary sense. It's the other side of the coin to a jump scare. So a jump scare is very much just your body's reaction, and so is body horror.
It's like your stomach's reaction.
Yeah, it's
honestly.
your stomach, it's your gut reaction to the thing. And so if you're too connected to being the power fantasy of the Doomslayer, your brain won't allow your body to respond to that, because it's too focused on ripping and tearing.
Yeah.
And everything versus.
And you're so powerful. It's like, what are you afraid of?
Yeah. The whole point is to get to the point where you're powerful enough that you're just a master of killing these things, which is good. And the lore in the game, in the most recent Dooms, plays upon that. You are the horror for these demons.
Yeah, you're the Babadook. You're the boogeyman.
Yeah.
You're the thing that those things fucking check their closets for.
And I think that is part of what makes Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal a little bit more clever, is recognizing that this probably is only going to scare a percentage of people, so we're not calling this a horror game.
Yeah.
This is an action power game with some gruesome stuff in it, but we're going to take that handful of people that aren't connecting to it on a cringe level or squeamish level, and we're going to give them a little bit of story flavor that, the reason you're not is because you're Jason. You're Freddy. You're not the kids. Kids are dying by droves from your hand. It's like the kill to death ratio in that game is out of control. Like, you're essentially the most unstoppable thing that's ever existed. Even if you die 15 minutes into the game, you've taken out dozens of things on the way, right? Like, that's terrifying.
You, within the first few minutes, just grab a demon and rip it in half.
Yeah,
like
so
it's hard to feel frightened when these things. The one thing I appreciated about the Doom 2016 was how frightened they made the demons look when you did your glory kills. That whole, like, you grab them and you just see that demon just, I am gonna die.
Up. Yep.
Oh fuck, this is bad.
It wants to live and it's terrified. Another good thing about this that Doom definitely blasts through, that what were the games that you mentioned that you feel are horror that aren't? Papers, Please.
Yeah.
That's that human wearing down. That's that empathy horror right there.
Empathy horror is
just like, don't give me a bad one. Don't give me a bad one. Don't give me. And then you grit through it, and then you just hope that, like, nothing bad is going to happen based off of your decisions. But
I mean, this War of Mine did that to me so hard.
Yeah.
I played that game, and there was a moment in it where my people were starving. It was a really bad scene. I found a house that had plenty of supplies and an old couple in it. And it's like, okay, so these 3 survivors I've grown to love over the course of hours, who've had to do some bad things to survive, are now faced with this ultimate ugly task of, in order for them to live through the night, and there is no more time to go out and find anything else, I have to rob this elderly couple. And that game, just when you're feeling as shit as possible, just pours a little extra salt on it to be like, and as you leave, you come to the realization that you probably killed those people, and it was better you should have just killed them in the first place. It's like, Jesus. And that was the type of game that I walked away from with this general sense of just like, am I a bad person? And that type of horror, that morality horror, that political horror is very rare, but I think a very valid form of tension and fear.
Absolutely. On the note of tension, one of the things I love, and you kind of hit it with the unseen, because it helps build this as well. Something that limits my ability to play a game for a long time is my inability to suss out whether I'm safe in the majority of the game. So I play a lot of third-person action games, a lot of RPGs, a lot of games like that. And there's the classic trope in video games, even in like first-person shooters and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, I've come upon a room that resupplies all my ammo and heals me up.
Yep. Look at all those chest-high walls.
Yeah. I'm about to step into a cover fight or a boss battle, right? And if a game does a good job, there's almost always going to be one or two points in a game that are safe. In a horror game, a lot of times it'll be dealing with a merchant, like Resident Evil style, right?
Literal safe houses, like Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, like Left 4 Dead, literal safe houses. There will be safe moments. But when you're out in the world of the game, when you're actively playing the game, if you don't know if something's going to be empty or full, you're not sure if the door is going to have something in it. If a game is so well reserved that it's like, yeah, I'm going to give you 2 jump scares through the entirety of this game. So you are going to be confident things don't come out of cupboards, and then a thing's going to come out of a cupboard. And then you're going to worry about that for like the majority of the rest of the game. And then you're going to be like, okay, that was the one. And then I'm going to hit you with it again, right? Like balancing those things, keeping that tension so that I'm never comfortable. That means I can only play a game for 2 hours at a time. But it means that game is nailing what it's doing, which is keeping me in a fear state.
Subnautica did that for me through the vast majority of the game. Outlast is a notably very scary game. That was a game at the beginning of playing it, I could play it in hour chunks, and I'm like, fuck, I'm going to have a heart attack. I am fat. I'm going to die if I keep playing this. Yeah. And after a couple of sessions coming back to it, it's kind of lost that sense of constant fear and dread. Cause I'm like, so there's going to be a jump scare around the next corner. Yeah. But Subnautica, because it's very open, because it's very random, you don't know what's going to come up from below you. You're in the ocean. You're in open water. And that's how the game starts, is just open water. It is not billed as a horror game, but I would encourage any people who enjoy tension and horror games, go get Subnautica, because it was the most scary game I have played in years, and it is not supposed to be a horror game. It's a crafting survival game.
Yeah, survival games do dance in the world of horror games a lot because of that lack of power, because of that, like, bottom line, my name is Steve, but I'm going to talk about another Steve. I'm going to talk about Minecraft Steve. You're just digging around, you turn around, bam, creeper. And you're just like, oh, God, it happens in Minecraft. Minecraft is masterful at jump scares as a non-horror game, even though it kind of sets itself up like a cutesy horror game, right? If you're out at night, you're going to run into shit, right? But it's a crafting survival game, essentially.
Ark does that too really well.
Ark, a lot of games do that. And if you're starting off weak, like there, and when people are like, yeah, but you're crafting and stuff, and I'm like, with games like Terraria or Stardew Valley, those are the games that you're not afraid when you're crafting, right? Animal Crossing, Harvest Moon, these are Farmville, right?
I mean, Terraria has combat.
Terraria
and things
has
that attack
combat
you.
And has things that attack you, but you're pretty safe early on in Terraria, or like at the beginning.
Fair, that's true.
By comparison to if you're just kind of screwing around in Minecraft day one, which you're likely to do because that's what the game bills itself as, and you're digging, you're gonna get killed by a creeper. It's gonna happen. There's a reason that's a meme. There's a reason things dying is a meme. There's a reason that there's a meme in the ultimate Lego game that relates to things disappearing and dropping their stuff. And it's because things die in Minecraft. And so little horror pieces of that, little jump scary parts, I feel like are way more effective in games where I'm not prepared for them. Because like you said, it works for a bit and then you're done. And then you know that it's going to happen. It's why a game like Five Nights at Freddy's is so effective, because you're trying to lean into the jump scare. You are trying to see them and lock doors and check for it. You are actively engaging, building tension, knowing that that's going to happen. And if you're good, you can make it not be a terrible thing.
And Five Nights at Freddy's, I'm glad you brought it up. I'll
We were talking horror games.
Yeah,
So
Five Nights at Freddy's isn't my speed. It's not my jam.
No.
That said, I think Five Nights at Freddy's does an incredible job of something that a lot of games don't do, which is once you expect the thing, you no longer get scared or you no longer jump at the thing. I felt one of the things, and this is a frequent criticism of Dead Space. I love Dead Space. I think the first Dead Space is an excellent example of a survival horror game. Mm-hmm. Biggest mistake they made, though, is just up front, right in your face, body horror, this is the thing you're dealing with, right at the beginning, because they didn't give you enough time to get that effect. And the problem with Dead Space was after a while, the I keep wanting to call them xenomorphs, but I know they have a specific name, and I am going to get my Dead Space card revoked for forgetting it. But at any rate, the monsters in Dead Space, they were so shown up front, and then didn't do a good job of maintaining that to where they just didn't really frighten me.
No.
After the initial scene. And Five Nights at Freddy's, even though you see it up front, everyone knows this is Jump Scare Simulator. People, you've seen it on YouTube. Your favorite YouTuber has played it when it came out or at some point around Halloween and did the, I'm overreacting to the jump scare. But truly, I played that game a bit, and frankly, it got me every fucking time. Yeah. Even though I knew it's a stupid animatronic. It's
because you have to lean into it.
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's an excellent mechanic where in every other game you know that jump scares happen. You move slower. You gird yourself in that moment, but that's not the whole game. Mm-hmm. In this game, you can't not keep checking monitors, right? You have to keep switching and figuring out which things to lock. And so you don't have that choice. It's weird because it's removed the player's power from bracing for the jump scare, even though they know it's going to happen, because they don't know when it's going to happen. And the game's point is to be fast and make sure they don't get in the room. So like,
I mean, it's meant to give you that thrill, that jump scare.
It's also not a game I've played a lot because I'm not a huge horror game fan, but like, I got to give him credit. There's not a lot of games that are based off such a simple mechanic, that are based off such a simple, like hook, basically, that actually are worth playing. And for people that like a good jump scare game, it's there's a reason that there's Five Nights at Freddy's merch in Target, right?
Yeah.
It's huge.
It's all, I mean, it's all over the place, and that's cool. I think again, it comes down to it maintains its effectiveness despite being formulaic, and knowing after you've played through one session of Five Nights at Freddy's, you've played through everything you'll ever need to know about Five Nights at Freddy's, short of being one of those lore divers. There are people who are super into the series, and I love watching those people on YouTube, but I do not want to be one of those people.
Nope.
I think the lore is fascinating. I think the mini games that are hidden throughout the game are such a cool way to tell a story. But for most of us who just pick up the game and don't want to become obsessed with it, it's just a jump scare simulator. And I think on two levels that makes it kind of cool, because it's an effective thing to play and get that horror thrill. But if you really want to invest the time into it, it turns into this mystery horror about what's actually happening with the animatronics, and that's super cool.
Yeah. It's pretty good. I don't necessarily think, I'm not the guy to ask about this, but based off of what you described and everything, do you feel like lore is a key aspect? Like, because there's environment like sound and kind of like sound and sort of like aesthetic vibe, obviously, but do you feel like lore is a key aspect to horror games, right? Like a sort of slow unraveling of a mystery, or a revealing of what happened here, kind of a thing that happens in a lot of horror games.
So yes and no. I mean, it's horror is such a wide genre, but I feel as though for many genres of horror, lore is very important because it builds the world. It makes you invested in the characters. Like I really loved figuring out what was actually going on with the world while playing through Lone Survivor. That is an excellent. If you get a chance, it's super cheap on Steam. It's a side-scrolling, like SNES era graphic style game, and it is very reminiscent of something between Silent Hill and Twin Peaks, which is just up. It's just for me. That was built for me.
Yeah.
But the director's cut is really great. The original is good too, and yeah, it's unraveling those mysteries and finding that lore and discovering what happened in the world can be so much fun. One I enjoy is State of Decay and State of Decay 2. Those are two of the best building a community to survive the zombie apocalypse games. But I love that the storytelling is done through lore and kind of randomized NPC interactions that you learn all these things. And through multiple playthroughs of the game, I'm starting to find out stuff that even though I've played through the game several times now, I'm still learning things about the universe and how the zombie plague happened and why the blood plague happened in the second one. It's that type of stuff can really invest a horror fan. And I think people tend to view horror as cheap thrills, which it very much can be. One of my favorite VR experiences is just basically a roller coaster of jump scares to watch my friends see VR for the first time. But like, besides that, getting invested in deeply in horror is something that I think is fun for really hardcore fans of the genre, or even people who are just really like dabbling in horror and like story-rich things.
All right, well, I'm out of what makes horror good, even though I
Yeah.
don't like the game styles. But I was like, there's still things I like. There's still horror games that I've played. I might talk about some of those on the next episode.
I'll continue just a little bit. I wanted to mention one thing that I think
Yeah.
you can appreciate is sound design.
Oh, yeah.
Sound design is so important for a horror game or a movie. It can take a bad movie and elevate it to passable or even good status. The Silent Hill movie is not very good. The sound design in the Silent Hill movie is fucking excellent.
Pitch perfect.
And the reason I enjoy that movie, I will still fight you to say that is a good movie simply based on the sound design. But it's not, if you were to just have basic bland sound design or you didn't listen to it in surround sound, it wouldn't be that effective of a horror film. And there are a few video games in recent years that have really nailed it. Sticking in that Silent Hill universe, Silent Hill 2 had one of the most effective soundtracks and sound effects that I played back in that era. In the modern day, if you've never played Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which I've mentioned on the podcast before, you really should if you can handle it. It plays a lot on mental illness, and you play a character who is suffering from schizophrenia. The reason I enjoy this game, one of the big things that stuck out as unique for me was how some of the first people credited on the game's creation are mental health professionals.
Yeah.
They didn't just go, isn't crazy wacky. The sound design and the voices in your head, I had to keep putting the game down because it was just so unnerving. If you just touched me on the shoulder, I would fucking throw my headset. It was so deeply designed that everything is jumping and popping around your ears, and you hear different types of voices all in Senua's voice that drive the story forward, and the voices can be anywhere from helpful to discouraging to downright terrifying. You have one ear feeling like it's behind your head telling you can do this, you can climb over the wall, and then you hear on the other side it's like, if you climb you're gonna die. And that is your constant experience through this game. Is she's also the visuals are great too, but it's that sound that when a game tells you to wear headphones, listen to them. That usually means they're very proud of something they did with the sound. And I'm not to say you owe anybody anything when it comes to how you enjoy your entertainment. If you want to mix everything down onto a cassette tape and play your music exclusively off cassette tapes, who am I to poop on your party? But I personally feel I would be neglecting the art if I didn't put headphones on when they say to.
Yep. Absolutely.
Have you had sound design like kind of get you? Is that something that even in non-horror is that something that can make you very tense?
So it's hard for me because shout out to my partially to fully deaf brethren. I only have my left ear, so things like stereos with voices coming in, nope, all just comes in like this to me.
That is a privilege I never really thought of as a person who has good hearing.
I was actually before you said that, I was like, do I bring up the fact that maybe I should because I'm part of that community?
No, it's something I don't think about.
And so if something's in surround sound and I'm not wearing headphones, right? If it's in 5 or 7 point surround sound and I'm not wearing headphones, yeah, because I've lived my entire life with reduced hearing. I'm completely deaf on my right side, reduced hearing. I still have the spatial awareness because I, locate it by its intensity, but it doesn't hit me because I'm not getting a vibration of eardrum and like a little pool of water, like of fluid and everything, the whole inner ear aspect. It doesn't hit me like how horror, like that, how that can absolutely, like the ASMR aspects of how horror can really hit people.
That's funny. That's actually works.
and everything. And so number one, I don't game usually with headphones unless I'm streaming because it's a pain to force everything into mono sound. Like all headphones will do it off of a computer, but I just listen to it live in speakers. And number two, yeah, for me, a lot of the things, it means that if thing over here is being like, you can do this, and it's supposed to be at the back, and it's supposed to be right here, if it's equalized into a monaural thing for me, or if it's just coming at you stereo, it's the same volume coming from the same space. So that takes away from it. It doesn't give me that sensory, like something's over there. If I've got headphones on and I've made it monaural sound, everything comes exactly from here. So again, it's not even very realistic as to how life lives. So there's almost no way, unless I'm sitting in a good sound setup, to give me that. And if something whispers too low, I'm just gonna miss it. And so yeah. I think sound design is incredibly important, though, and I will absolutely get into that with one of my picks for horror games in the next one, because even with my hearing loss, there are certain things that you do with sound design that can take that into consideration. Anyone that listens to my music, if it's been released through Death Star or such, we never go more than 20% to the left or to the right. Like more so on that, because I refuse to allow it to happen because I hate listening to headphones and not hearing. Like I can accept that I'll hear some things a little softer, and that still helps kind of define it for me, but I can still hear it. But we never hard pan left or right, or even like 80-90% pan. Like we keep it relatively center channel in that for that very reason.
I learned a bunch of stuff at the end.
Welcome to like, it was so great. It always happens because it's not visually apparent, and I don't advocate for it a lot. But even our producer, even Bill Beats, will like ask me. He's like, "Steve, what do you think of these headphones?" Not jokingly, and I'll be like, "I don't know, they're probably good." Like, because a pair of really bad headphones, I'll notice. But like the moment you get to like $40 and up, it's all pretty much the same to me, except for bass levels.
That makes sense. Yeah, and again, thanks for sharing that. I mean, on the podcast and as well as just with me, because you've mentioned your ear before, but I didn't know that there was hearing loss completely on that side, and that is very much a lesson in privilege that we get live. Is that I just gone my whole life with just good ass hearing, but I mean, I have a good ass hearing and good ass sight. I don't wear glasses. My eyes are good. My ears are good.
Yeah, this is in no way meant to, but like call you out either. Since you brought it up, I was like, yeah, I'll get into this now. It's not like there are certain people, obviously, in the community that would be much more touchy about it or much more serious. And I don't know this. I wish I did. I wish I'd thought about it on the sound design, because I did think about sound design. So for those listening to this, and for me after we get done recording, I'm going to go look up at the horror things that do this, and then the ones that are be like, we let you adjust the sound so it's just stereo. like so that, because stereo is fine. Stereo means that if you're partially deaf or you're half deaf, in my case, where you're fully deaf in one ear, or you have like deep loss of hearing in one ear, you can always, with any set of headphones, with any system, take a stereo feed from whatever you're hearing and squish it into binaural, and it's fine. What sounds less good is 5.1 and 7.1. If you squish those into a binaural feed, the mids get in each other's way real bad. And it just doesn't work as well. It's fine, but you really got to build something into it. Most games I would expect that. I know it's part of the Unreal Engine to just, set your, like the Unreal game engine. I know it's part of the Unity engine.
I think Senua Sacrifice even has. I mean, I very rarely find a game that doesn't have a stereo setting.
Yeah, that doesn't have it, and so it's pretty common. But if a game is very reliant or like sound forward, I can 100% imagine that they're like, no, we need to do it because this is how you play the game. And admittedly, I'm fine with it. If your game is really based around something, and that means that certain people can't play it, like that is unfortunate, but there's not enough of those games, I think, that a community would necessarily be upset about it. And like I feel like that's just a very niche thing to do, to be like, yeah, you need surround sound, a really good set of headphones to play this particular game. That's one game in 10,000, right? If even that.
And it's interesting. My disability is very catered to in video games. I never realized, because up front, every single video game has a seizure warning.
Oh yeah.
And most games, especially these days, have like, hey, there's lightning in this game. You want us to turn that off for you, little buddy? Oh, hey, we have a photosensitive mode, so it doesn't flash.
Or they just auto dim it, like Funimation does with their animes when they're worried about them flashing when you're streaming on Funimation, which is great. Where they're like, yeah, this is a little bright and flashy. We're just gonna dim this down.
I think we need to do an episode on accessibility options in games, because we're deep into this now.
Yeah,
and
obviously. Okay, so we're gonna step back to close the horror.
We're gonna close the horror,
but that is absolutely, there's absolutely an accessibility in games thing, especially because I'm thinking about, man, there's something. I reached out to a group of people. I'm going to be doing a benefit for accessibility in games. Concert-y kind of thing of nerd music.
Cool.
Coming up, like a charity thing. But more about that in that episode and all that stuff. That isn't until the tail end of this year.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for watching and listening. Of course, if you want to watch us, you can check us out on YouTube. And that's going to be youtube.com/dyingofexposure.
Yep.
I got
that is correct. You got it.
And dyingofexposure.com.
Yep.
It's another place you can go. You can also just go to, like, if you want to check out podcast only, that's podbean.com therollsweplay.podbean.com.
Yep.
I know my own URL.
Yeah, and then I think you have a role-playing site of some
Yeah, Leota Role-Playing, and also like the Roles We Play and Dying of Exposure are both all over the Facebook, if that's your jam. Do you guys Twitter? We
do. I have Twitter. I have Instagram. I have a Tumblr.
Fuck, I can't keep up.
I for a hot second had a TikTok. And then of course
got banned for nudity.
And got immediately banned for nudity. Immediately banned for stapling a nude pair of nipples from a woman onto my male nipples, and just instantly banned. From a magazine.
Okay.
Not like I realized when I looked.
This is the horror episode.
I'm like, what are you talking?
My brain is on horror right now, man.
A picture, not a. Anyway, but yeah, follow us everywhere. Whether it's dying of exposure or the roles we play, you can find us on social medias and stuff like that.
Well, all right. I am Ron for Steve and the roles we play. I'll play myself out.
An unearthly world of eternal darkness, ghostly kingdom of the undead demons of death. On these horrifying, hideous creatures of evil,
Greetings, friends,
My name is Steve Kelsey.
and I'm Ron Leota, and this is The Roles We Play, the show about the roles we play in the games we love. On the show today, we have the second part of our Halloween Spooktacular. We're talking about our favorite horror games. Without further ado, let's start the show. I did it again, didn't I? Halloween Spooktacular. Is it better now? Is it cooler this time? The second time?
No.
I learned from mid 2000s cartoons and comedy that if I beat the shit out of something, it eventually becomes funny.
Yeah, it's that is how you get there. You're right. So what we should now, this is how this will become funny. So this is November 1st that this is coming out, right? Technically, right?
Actually, I'm going to release it a day early, so it's out on Halloween. This is the Halloween special. This is the Spooktacular.
This is the Spooktacular. All right, so this is coming out actually on Halloween. Here's the deal: if our November 15th and if our November 15th and our December 1st episodes are called the November Spooktacular, then I'm fucking in. If the rest of this year every episode is referred to as a Thanksgiving Spooktacular, a Hanukkah Spooktacular, like I'm 100% in. But that is the only way that I will respect the Spooktacular format, because I have about as much respect for it as hashtag hot take warning horror games, meaning none respect for it. Horror games, we've discussed this in the last episode, but horror games,
They're Steve's favorite genre.
they're absolutely my top shelf favorite genre. I love them to death. You know what's great about Resident Evil is how the nature of the gameplay of Resident Evil means that it can't trigger your horror senses because you can shoot shit, and it's not actually mortally threatening you. Now, if you put on a VR, sure, you're in VR, and that does bring it closer, but then you realize that this gun in your hand, which strangely feels like a PS4 or Xbox controller, manages to blow their heads off, and you can get bit multiple times and attacked, and you don't die instantly.
So today we're talking about our favorite horror games.
So it's not Resident Evil for me. I held back in the last one because we were talking about genre generalness. But now that I'm talking about my favorites, it means I can dunk on my least favorites. And as much as I love RE4, if you call that shit a horror game, you can just get the fuck out of the room.
It's an action adventure game with horror elements.
Yeah,
I will say the regenerator creature,
absolutely
genuinely terrifying. Other than that, there was a couple really good jump scares in Resident Evil 4, but for the most part, it was just a great action adventure game.
It's just a very good game. It's a great game. I moved a lot of GameCubes with that game when I managed to GameStop, where I'd be like, "You don't have a GameCube? Get it." Cause back when it was for the kids, it was a GameCube exclusive for about 2 years, or for about a year and a half.
I had it on GameCube.
Yeah,
in fact, I have the Resident Evil 4 GameCube chainsaw commemorative controller.
Yep, I used to have one of those as well.
I bought that at a trade show.
Yeah, I just put one aside because I managed to GameStop and then got it with my discount.
Bastard.
But horror games.
So let's do this. You do one, then I'll do one,
okay.
And at the end we'll each do three. I'm gonna do games from different mediums as well as different games, but no real rules. Just three of your favorite horror things.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be video games for me. I'll start off, but it's gonna have to be video games for me only because I haven't really played like a tabletop RPG pen and paper horror game before. Like I've kind of danced with World of Darkness, but unless the DM is good, or like World of Darkness is about as horrible or about as horror game as Underworld movies are horror movies. Like it's an action. It's hard to pull the murder hobo out of tabletop in every genre.
Strap in. Strap in.
Strap in. I'm ready. So I'm going to start, and I'm actually going to start with the shirt that I'm wearing, which is a Bit Brigade shirt. Bit Brigade is a video game cover band, but it's a Castlevania shirt. And I'm going to discuss how Castlevania is a horror game. This is specifically Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. And it's not that Castlevania as a game, like the graphics didn't scare me. Like it was there's a lot good to say about Castlevania, even Castlevania 2. But Castlevania 2 is a horror game for one reason and one reason only.
I know. You had to have Nintendo Power to know what to do next.
Well, I mean, that's 100% true. You were just lost.
I'm off.
You're close. And I'm just going to say this, and for all of us older gamers out there that played it, it's a terrible night. What a terrible night for a curse. The moment that thing would pop up as text out of nowhere, and you knew with dread and a bit of a jump scare, because it would just come up on you. There was no way to know.
It's just that high-pitched text sound.
That high-pitched suddenly like, and then it was nighttime, and then you were fucked, because everything was worse at night than it was in the daytime. And so you trying to get back, or if you're in kind of a weak position and it's suddenly nighttime, there's that beat. It's perfect. It gives you that jump scare, like a little bit of a jump scare. Then you know what's happening. Then the dread sets in, and you only have so much time before you've got to react. So if you're in the wrong situation, it is an incredibly unsettling thing. And no game at that time had ever done anything emotionally like that to a little kid, Steve, whose biggest dread before that was, even with Game Genie, how the fuck do I get past Mike Tyson in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out? He's so hard. I'm literally cheating at maximum level, and I still can't beat him. What the fuck, Mike?
300 tries and a lot of pattern memorization.
I
That's
like
how
so
I beat
many
him.
of my dreams gave up on it. But even when all of the gifts given to me to beat it were in front of me.
It's so interesting that you mention that moment in Simon's Quest, because that moment has been popularized in nerd culture as a very negative thing. AVGN just did a 5-minute rant about fuck that. Like, it's so long, it takes up so much time every time it happens, it's unnecessary. So to hear someone that actually, because for me, I actually kind of agree. I always thought that was a weird take on that moment. That moment to me was that moment of that pause of dread, that momentary, that like jump scare, but then like momentary calm before the oncoming storm. And it had you survived even one night, that's a storm coming.
Yeah, it's something. So Sequelitis does a great, because Ego Raptor has like 4 episodes of Sequelitis, and one of them is Castlevania 2, and he expresses the weaknesses of Castlevania 2 as a sequel to the original Castlevania, but that is not one of them. And he actually brings that up in the same thing, and it absolutely brought me back to those moments where I would hate that. I would just hate it. Not because it would frustrate me. A lot of Metroidvania and Castlevania games put walls up in front of your progress. That's kind of part of their aspect, is that you get to an area, like, I want to get there. How do I get there? I got to go figure out how I get there. I got to go figure out what I need to get and go to areas that I can get to, and then hopefully eventually I'll get here. And so the idea that there's a moment of waiting, I would say Castlevania 2 goes too heavy into it with all the people in the rooms and the stuff, and there's lots of things to criticize. But for me, that is some pitch perfect. Take a beat. You're fucked. Okay, get back into the game. And you don't always, and I imagine, especially if you've played it a number of times, you're very good at the game, then it is tedious because there is no threat to it. But when you're playing it for the first time, and you're not managing your shit well, and you're not near enough a town yet to a priest, you're just like, God damn it. Like, I was headed on my way. Now I got to survive, and you've been back and forth, so you know what's in front of you to get back to where you're safe, and that might be just impossible, and you're just like, I'm screwed until daytime.
So I'm going to jump between mediums. I'm going to end on one of my all-time favorite horror properties, but I'm going to start with board games, actually. Board games don't scare me. This isn't a scary list. This is a horror-related horror genre list. So the first one I'm going to mention is the Arkham Horror board game series.
Mm-hmm.
Right up front, fully admit H.P. Lovecraft, absolute monster of a human being. But the people who have written the mythos through the years since his death have done an incredible job of of eliminating a lot of the problematic elements, and in fact pointing out and deliberately subverting those elements. And that's why I can very much still appreciate things like Arkham Horror, despite not reading H.P. Lovecraft anymore. Get off that soapbox for now. But I wanted to mention a few of the games in the series. There's Mansions of Madness, Eldritch Horror, Arkham Horror, and then Arkham Horror card game. And in that order is kind of how I enjoy them. Mansions of Madness is like a GM style board game where you have somebody who is the game master, and that is probably my least favorite type of board game, is where somebody has to take that game master role, because that's usually me. And I game master so many tabletop games that when I'm playing a board game, I don't want to have to put that work in, or I would just run a one-shot tabletop game. I think that's a very personal reason for that one, but Mansion of Madness is still a really good horror game. Eldritch Horror I absolutely love because it takes the rules of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition and simplifies them a lot and brings it out into a more of a worldview. It doesn't have as strong of storytelling elements as the Arkham Horror 2nd Edition game does, but it really, really does have a great pick up and play feel. So if you need something to pick up and play, nobody's going to be the GM. Once you've played it once or twice, you can crank out one of those sessions in an hour and a half to 2 hours. And that's really important, especially when you're with board games where you're just trying to come together and get through a thing. Now, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition is incredible if you have 4 hours. That's the thing. If you're hosting, you're also going to have 30 minutes of setup and teardown around those 4 hours of gameplay, and that's if you can get everybody to focus. So it is a commitment. It's a slog, but oh my goodness, is there some rich storytelling in there, and is there a lot of fun to be had? But oh my God, the amount of time investment for Arkham Horror is a hard sell. Which is why the Arkham Horror card game has become my now favorite in that whole series. It's a deck builder. So you have you build your character sheet is a deck of cards. And so your character has different abilities, and each character has, your hit points and whatnot. And then you tell a series of stories in these written scenarios in a sort of choose your own adventure style, but they're serial stories. So things you do in one play session will greatly impact the next play session throughout the entire story series. And the story series can be anything from 3 sessions to like a dozen sessions long. My only complaint about it, and which is why this one is probably is the lowest, the first one on my list, is the monetization model of it smacks of everything I hate about video game monetization, in that everything about this game is DLC. It's you buy the core game and you get 2 scenarios. And you can keep replaying those scenarios, but frankly, you're going to want to get more scenarios. And the scenarios are expensive. And it's a constant, gotta buy the next part, gotta buy the next part, gotta buy the next part. They're not stolen sets. They're usually parsed out. So like my wife and I are playing through the Dunwich Horror set. We had to purchase 10 individual things in order to be able to play that entire story. That is awful. But in our state of privilege where we can afford to buy those sorts of things, it's very fun, but I wouldn't break your bank if you...
It's not preventative.
Yeah, but I wouldn't break the bank on this game, frankly, if you're looking for a horror experience. It might not be worth it. But for me, I absolutely adore it. The way they play with the mythos, the stories they tell have a lot of depth. And for me, that's what I'm looking for when I sit down to play a horror game. Plus, I'm the type that can replay those scenarios multiple times and still enjoy it. So there's a little bit of I would give a little bit of a caveat on that one. Also, Arkham Horror 3rd Edition I can't stand, so I brought up 2nd Edition for a reason. I'm being very particular. There is a new version of Arkham Horror. It's a very, very different board game, and not my speed.
Now, the only board games that I played that I would call like actual horror, like there's this game called Ghost Owl, which is cute, and it's got ghosts, but like it's not like depthy. It's more of a mechanic. It's more like a skinning for a mechanic than anything else. Is Elder Sign, which is an Arkham Horror kind of informed game. That's got rooms and cards, and you're a character, and there's tokens and stuff like that. And that's actually was a good, would be the only way that I'd recommend that game is significantly is for people that are interested in horror games, but you got to build a bridge to get them to there. And Elder Sign's a little easier to manage an individual character. There's not as much complexity to it. It's got a faster setup. There's not a ton to track, and they only have to pay attention to their characters, and it's cooperative. So like it hits all the beats of getting someone to, if they're interested in horror, like they're a horror movie buff, but they haven't played a lot of like meatier board games or serious board games, give them Elder Sign first. That'll feel like H.P. Lovecraft enough. And then be like, okay, now that you've done this, the idea of sanity and health as separate things have all been introduced to you. Now I'm going to take it up a level to something superior. And then, what is it? Betrayal on Hill House or whatever it is?
Betrayal on House on the Hill.
House on the Hill.
Yeah.
Which I love. I love that game. And I completely forgot about it.
First and second edition are really good.
Yeah. I think
awesome.
they're really fun. I love the idea that randomly someone's going to betray you. Potentially. Like, and I love that it just hits a bunch of tropes. It's a fun game. So I will say that I wasn't really thinking about it because I was thinking about things that scare me, not just the genre of horror. And so I've played a little bit more in the genre of horror.
Real quick though, before we jump off board games, I wanted to give a shout out to Camp Grizzly. If you're looking for a game, it was a Kickstarted game. If you're looking for something that you can pick up and play quickly, like when I say pick up and play quickly, it's not as complicated as Clue, even, frankly.
Oh, okay.
But it's a game that I can see sitting down and playing with my parents, even. And I think that's a great one to jump in. It's a slasher movie board game. You are trying to escape the camp from the slasher, and you have to go around the board and get things to leave. That's the whole game. It's super easy to pick up and play. It's pretty cheap. You can pick it up on most retailers.
Man, I have played so many more horror board games than I thought I had.
You probably, I mean, that's the thing. There's
Zombicide.
Just zombies.
Yeah, like I've actually like now
Mixtape Massacre.
Mixtape Massacre. Yep. There was an old VHS horror game that I used to play. Those ones where you would play a VHS.
Oh, I love that game. Atmosphere.
Yeah.
Atmosphere. That game, oh my God, we're going to go on a nostalgia trip. That fucking game with the VHS, Atmosphere, the Harbingers. I want to know where the gatekeeper is these days. Because it's
Do you
there.
have the key? Because, where is that actor?
Because that dude, he is so great. It's a movie, there's a videotape, and he's the timekeeper. And every once in a while, he just pops in. He's this spooky crypt keeper-like character, and he just pops in to talk shit and ruin your day. And he's just like, and he always pops in like, who's next? Hands up. All right, you're going back to the start. And it's like...
it was a real fun mechanic because for those, again, that are younger, potentially they're listening to
There's a newer DVD version.
Is there?
Mm-hmm. I have it.
So the way that it worked was on a VHS, when you'd fast forward, you'd just see it as it fast forward. And so they made sure that the time code was nice and big and clear so that the banding that would happen during a fast forward wouldn't obfuscate it. So it would tell you fast forward to this section on the tape. So it was like a VHS tape version of a choose your own adventure buried into a board game, which wasn't super common in the 90s.
We might think of something else because a different version, because Atmosphere, the Harbingers, that tape, you were just, the only time you fast forwarded is if you beat it.
No, so this was a gatekeeper and a key. Like you were trying to get a key and he was the gatekeeper. Maybe you didn't fast forward. I thought you fast forwarded.
You're a bunch of classic horror monsters going around collecting different keys from different sections, and midway through the game, the board flips.
No, I don't think we were.
It's a different game.
Game, okay.
But Atmosphere did put out several versions.
Yeah, and so maybe that's just what was happening. But either way.
What's your second pick?
What's my second pick? We went way off the rails. I mean, I guess. The Atmosphere series. Go check it out. So second pick is Fatal Frame, specifically Fatal Frame 2.
Good ass game.
PS2. The Fatal Frame series, though. What a series that couldn't continue being a thing for like I was like, so I'm not a big fan of horror games. A horror game, ghosts, zombies, and stuff don't sell me as a category. I don't have an investment in them in advance, like I would say a science fiction role-playing game, where I'm like, oh, there's sci-fi, I'm in. doesn't do that, and I never really sought out Fatal Frame. But as I've said many times on this, I used to manage a GameStop, and Fatal Frame 2 would be up there on the PS2 shelf in the used section, and I'd talk with people about talk with customers about their games and their favorite games. This is back in the PS2 era, right at the end of it, when the PS3 and the 360, and the 360 and the Wii were all coming out in that roughly year time frame. And they're like, oh, those Fatal Frame games. And I'm like, I've never played them. And so I did what GameStop employees do with used games. I checked one out from the GameStop, so I didn't have to buy it. It was part of their system. And brought it home and played it, and was actually legitimately unsettled while I played that game.
Nice.
Fully powerless.
Tell the people the premise of Fatal Frame.
So basically, for Fatal Frame, essentially it centers around photography and being able to see. It's a very Japanese horror game, and I can't remember the difference between the 1 and 2 plots, but essentially there's ghost girls and other ghost things, and you have a camera, and you have to see them through the camera and take pictures and review those pictures, and there's mystery to solve, and you got to survive, and you don't shoot it most of the time. You're not shooting, and really that's all you need for a horror game. Otherwise it's an action game. And so Fatal Frame 2, like, it was just one of those things that I used to, after I played it, I used to just be like, anytime someone came up with Silent Hill or Resident Evil, I'd be like, you played Fatal Frame? You should buy Fatal Frame. Buy the Fatal Frame game. Fatal Frame is a good game. You should buy it. Do you want a subscription with that Fatal Frame? Would you like to reserve a copy of Madden 2005?
With Fatal Frame?
I'll throw in a free copy of Fatal Frame. I'll discount it for you. I'll play this game.
Then come back and talk to me about it.
And then come back and distract me from the fact that even though I'm at a GameStop, I'm A, still at a GameStop, and B, it's still retail.
Yeah. I worked at Blockbuster. That's how I got my big bulk of games, is they let you check them out, free rentals.
Yep. If it was already an open box, you got to check it out. And some GameStops might have taken those gutted new copies that they were required to gut for people not stealing games off shelves,
and use those as checkout copies.
And use those as checkout copies. I never did anything like that.
So I'm going to talk about a World of Darkness game as my second pick. A little callback there.
We'll call back to last episode.
So no, to this one, because you said something about World of Darkness at the beginning of this episode.
This episode?
Yeah,
God,
that's what happens when you record 2 in a row for the Halloween Spooktacular. Ooh. I gotta say, Hunter the Reckoning. I have played this game since it came out.
It's a great video game.
It's a pretty fair video game on Xbox.
Solid. It's a solid Xbox game. Multiplayer.
But the tabletop version, which is the original, is you play humans in a world of darkness where their monsters are real. You are given very, very slight. They call them edges because to call them powers versus the things supernatural creatures can do is laughable. So they're called edges. Mm-hmm. And what gives you these edges are kind of a mystery. The balancing act of the meta universe is all supposed to be a mystery to the players. The truth behind it isn't actually all that exciting, but it's better for the players to just all of a sudden something chose you to fight monsters and you were woefully unprepared to do so. And that's one of the things I think that makes it an effective horror game with a good storyteller, is having that more helpless feeling while not feeling completely helpless. So you have that power fantasy that drives a lot of tabletop games, but because you are so mortal, it gives you that sense of having to plan, of really fearing for your life in each encounter. Even the most simplest of encounter, if something gets a hold of you, there's a good chance it just tears you in half. And that as a role-playing game mechanic, and that sense of fear and dread is hard to do. And just doing tabletop RPG horror is already a very difficult ask. Hunter can very much be played as an action game, and it's fine as an action game. I personally run it as a deep horror game. And I think that's just more of genre preference for me. But the indie nerd in me really, really wanted to pick something else for tabletop, like because I wanted to do something a little more obscure, like Dread or Kids on Bikes, both of which are excellent and absolutely please support those properties. But if I'm being honest with myself, the horror tabletop game I have played the most is Hunter the Reckoning, and 20 years later, I am still coming back to it, running sessions of it.
So this is again off topic. I keep coming into things that I didn't pick as my main picks, but you'll say something. I'm like, you know what that applies to. So let's talk about original first edition and advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So you just brought up the power fantasy that typical tabletop games are and D&D. Let's talk about level 1 characters in first edition and advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because there ain't no power to that fantasy. You are likely to die by rat bites. Like, it is ridiculous how fragile your fighting man and your I can't remember what they called the elf rogue, right?
Well, shit, even modern D&D, like level 1 characters, it's like stuff like challenge rating scaling for a level 1 encounter character does D6 + 1 or D8 + 1 damage,
that can
can one-shot a sorcerer or bard.
Yeah. And so, but especially first edition AD&D era D&D before second edition, basically, is rough. It is hard. It is grindy. And so I think it's funny that Dungeons and Dragons now has become a superhero fantasy. Very much.
Oh yeah, you get very superhero very
quickly, and that's great. That's awesome, and I love playing in that world. That's why we do the podcast, even if you're not technically playing adventures, and it's why I started everyone at level 2, not level 1, so that I could hit you a couple times and not be like, fuck. It just made me call back to the one time I've tried to play straight up and down non-modified AD&D, and we spent hours building our characters. We went into the first room, and all of us but one character who just ran out of the room died. We spent maybe an hour playing the game, and we were like, all right, this is not fun, and no one should have liked this. But my actual third pick.
Here we go.
And I was going to go, because we mentioned it in the last episode with Walking Dead, and not it being an actual like horror game in the idea of scaring you, but it being steeped in the horror of zombies. But like we talked about that. We talked about how good that game is at doing that. And so you already got both of us signing off on approval on that. So I'm going to pick something that is super obvious, is not a horror genre game, but hits a lot of what we've talked about this episode and certainly last episode of the Roles We Play. Last of Us Part 1. You talk about protecting a child character or a youth character through it, you got it. You do not want anything bad to happen, and you will murder whatever's in your way. You talk about sign design, I'm going to talk about those clicking zombies.
Jesus.
Just terrifying you. You talk about not having enough for survival, as long as you're not playing it on easy or with any kind of mods to it. Even the regular play, you're running out of supplies all the time and desperately hunting and hoping that you find something and not making enough noise so that something that can absolutely kill you. You are squishy in that game, especially at first. It is very easy to lose. The world is tough. They do a fairly good job at avoiding a lot of tropes that most zombie stuff have touched upon, but they still let you know that exists in the world. So it's a dark world. The moral choices. I'm going to spoil the end of Last of Us because I feel like the game's been out since 2011 or 2012. I feel like it's been 8-9 years.
If you've really been banking on playing through Last of Us, like skip ahead a minute or two.
And skip ahead a minute ago. The end of that game is a morally traumatizing moment. And really brings about the fact that you are consigning humanity because you're not going to give up the person that you've bonded to. and so you're conscribing, you're letting humanity be basically tied to its fate of its current terrible life, and your anger and your player anger at the protagonist that you totally understand why he made that decision and you couldn't pick it. It so distracts from the fact that you also in your mind know that it's like, if that game had stood alone, like it probably should have, and just been a single one-shot story, the end of that game is you've very likely doomed the world.
And so I know this is not going to be a popular thing to say, but I loved Last of Us up until the ending. I know a lot of people really love the ending and really cherish that ending, but the nerd in me could not get past the totally bullshit science of we have to kill them. Why? Why? Any scientist will tell you that a live test subject is so far more valuable than a dead one.
They're gonna regenerate their bone marrow. They're gonna like. There's so many things
like
that
take a fucking spinal fluid sample and get over it. Jesus.
Yeah,
but
like because it's
still impactful. Still horrible that you have to make that decision. But the fact I had to make that decision pissed me off.
Yeah, because you're just like, there's no reason to kill this girl. The secret isn't inside the ventricles of her heart. You could have.
The files are
that.
in the computer.
But yeah, so Last of Us, constant state of dread. What I talked about in the last episode. When you're out in the world, you do not know what level of things are coming, and especially if you turn off things like echolocate, so you just got to live in it, and based off of what you naturally hear or see, and know like little blurry lines of things and outlines, like you can make that game incredibly tense.
Oh, yeah, and then when Ellie gets kidnapped in that, I was like genuinely like, I'm gonna end everyone.
I need to do this. I need to deal with this problem. I
need to get her back.
This is not. Oh, Joel's gonna wander around and do side quests for a while. Nope. I'm charging right into it. And it was the kind of game where that kind of level of tension and everything made it so that I couldn't play it like an Uncharted game. I couldn't just play half that game in one sitting. I would have to like put brakes and like release my hands and be like, okay, I need to blink. And so, so Last of Us Part 1 absolutely, hands down, hits me in the I'm flavored horror because I'm zombies. I'm flavored emotionally dramatic as a story. That's probably what makes me good. But all of the gameplay, all of the gameplay is pure tension in a superior, in when Resident Evil and Silent Hill are at their best. That is where that gameplay lives, is low resources, high tension, don't know if you're going to be able to make it through the next area. You're going to have to, you might have to die a few times in the game to figure out how you're going to survive, or if you can even confront what's there, or if you have to desperately try to hide from it. What is your last pick?
Final pick, Last of Us Part 1. The last pick.
Last of Us Part 2.
Last of Us Part 2.
Fuck you, it's a perfect game.
I love the part where you switch characters. That's the best part of the game. Fight me. I'm kidding. I haven't played it yet. But my favorite, this is genuinely my favorite horror video game, hands down. I know it is not a classic, but I fucking love it, Alan Wake. Alan Wake is, in my opinion, the perfect love letter to Stephen King and Twin Peaks without ripping either of those properties off. There are so many wonderful nods to things I personally love. I really like Stephen King. I really enjoy Twin Peaks. And that type of quirky, small Northwestern town mixed with this very dark, dreadful, dramatic story of a writer who loses his wife and all he wants to do is get her back, and there is a supernatural force keeping him from doing that. On top of that, there's a really great gameplay loop of a light versus dark mechanic. You have a flashlight, your enemies are covered in darkness. You have to burn away the darkness before you can fight them. So every time you enter combat, you are effectively helpless until you can make them vulnerable. And it takes a while, especially if you, my recommendation, if you want a true survival horror experience and play through an awesome story of Alan Wake, immediately set your difficulty to the hard difficulty. If you're good at these games, you're going to get through it. I don't consider myself an epic gamer. My hands are just too slow these days. But Alan Wake, I come back and play it probably every 3 years because the story is just that good for me. It is a game that, in my opinion, it is criminal. It never got a real sequel. Alan Wake American Nightmare was a follow-up. It was in genre in that it used the same light and shooting mechanic, but it was an action game and in no way a horror game, and that bummed me out. It just bummed me out. But I've got really good news for any other Alan Wake fans out there. And please comment if you're an Alan Wake fan, because there's not enough of us. But something awesome happened recently, and it involves a spoiler for the game Control, which is still... it's been out for a year or so I'm pretty comfortable saying it. But I know the DLC came out like a few months ago, so please, this is a little bit of a spoiler for Control. If you haven't played your DLC yet, skip this and do that. Alan Wake is in Control. And that made my life so happy. Yep. They did a whole DLC dedicated to the Bright Falls incident, which is the setting of Alan Wake. And Alan Wake, the original voice actor, comes back and does his part, and it perfectly sets up the Alan Wake sequel I've always wanted. And from the buzz, Remedy will be making Alan Wake 2 now because of the Control tie-in. So that makes me very, very, very excited and is almost like Christmas on Halloween.
So with that in our spooktacular picks for gaming, all for different reasons from different like styles of delivery of game and different eras and different formats too. You should have something to keep yourself occupied on this most punishing of Halloweens, just the most cruelest fate Halloween timing in the United States ever.
It is hard to want to watch horror in 2020.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to want to watch horror. Not a lot of reason to celebrate the mood. Also, there's quarantine and a pandemic, but Halloween is on a Saturday, on a full moon, on daylight savings time, so you get an extra hour of it. Sunday morning.
I know it is so tempting to party your face off on Halloween.
Don't do it.
Please don't.
Just don't. If you want to interact with people, there's a ton of scheduled events on the internet that you will be able to find to interact, get in those chat rooms, stuff like that. There's watch parties. You can, if you're kitschy and you want to watch like fun stuff, Netflix and Disney Plus both have a group watch function baked into them. Other services I'm sure do too. Keep to your bubbles, keep to your things. I know it's super hard, but we're like almost there, and it's already going to be fall. We're already going to see increases of things. So please, please be safe this Halloween. Don't go to a party. Don't break it out. If you really want to enjoy something, if wherever you're listening to and your night is fairly clear, go to your backyards, go to your patios, go to your outdoor spaces that are still able for you to stay at a distance from people, set up something and just listen to some creepypasta or some stuff, tell some scary stories to each other within your bubble. If you're doing this alone, socialize digitally as best as you can.
In fact, I will give you a couple of recommendations for things to check out tonight since it's Halloween. I'm going to put this out first thing in the morning. If you're looking for some fun stuff to listen to, check out Creeps McPasta or the Dark Somniums channel on YouTube. In no way sponsored by either of them, just really enjoy their work. Both do creepypasta readings that are absolutely fantastic, and they both have massive catalogs of stuff to listen to. If you're looking for a horror movie that's a little bit different, maybe you're not super into the gore and the deep stuff, hop on to Amazon Prime and check out the Taiwanese film PMOC. It is a romantic comedy horror movie about ghosts. And it is one of the most fun I have had watching a movie in a very long time. I'm going to rewatch it on Valentine's Day with my wife. We absolutely love this one. And so it's a lot of fun while also being more palatable. If you're looking for something super scary, I'm doing an Asian horror movie marathon over October. So a lot of my picks right now are going to be that. But Gaijin Haunted Asylum, which is a Korean horror movie, despite being a tired found footage film in a tired genre, oh, ghosts in the asylum, we're going to go there and try to stay there thing, it still manages to be one of the most effective horror movies I've seen, despite knowing exactly what's going to happen in the plot every second. I'm like, oh yeah, there's going to be something around that corner. And there is, yet I still want it to go away. Like, really good stuff. But yeah, be safe. Some sad fact about my life, the thing I look forward to all year is my big Halloween party I throw every year, and I'm just skipping it, despite it breaking my heart as a hardcore Halloween guy. It's just not worth it. That's the real horror out there right now, is not taking care of each other. So let's enjoy the fake horror and the things that we can control and not add to the real horror of 2020.
Yep. If I get my way, if I had my way, I would love for this of all to have been something that we could have at least half stepped toward, but unfortunately, that's not where we're at. So, stay safe. Enjoy horror where you can. Play any of the games that we've talked about if you can play them safely. Go to Discord. If you want to play Hunter the Reckoning, there are Hunter the Reckoning games you can play on the internet. There are tabletop games going constantly. There are Discord servers dedicated to finding people for that, and I absolutely guarantee you a ton of people will be running one-shots and looking for players during that time. Figure out a way to do it safely, and hopefully next Halloween we can all once again be around each other and celebrating all well vaccinated up and safe from this pandemic.
Next year's Spooktacular, maybe we can actually be spooky together. But until then, check out Dying of Exposure on the internet everywhere.
On the internet everywhere.
Check out the roles we play. We've enjoyed having you hang out with us on Halloween. It's one of my favorite days, and I hope, again, you guys stay safe out there. We got anything we need to plug before we go?
Be prepared. I guess I'll plug this, even though I still don't think the first episode will be out technically when this comes out. But be prepared. Keep eyes out for the Low Armor Cast.
The first time you've said the name.
Yeah, the Low Armor Cast with the Pit Crew. That is the D&D podcast, the actual play podcast that we do that comes out every other week. That should be coming out. I still haven't decided if it's late November or literally like the first week of December. But it kind of depends on how many episodes I have in the can and how comfortable I am with runway.
I would say we'll be comfortable next episode, probably with a more firm date.
By mid-November, you will, like the 15th episode of November for the roles we play, you will know when Low Armor Cast. But keep an eye out for that. I'm sure it'll be all over our social medias. Ron plays an excellent bard, failing that has flavoring that I've never heard in a tabletop game before. And then it is also joined by Kelsey, who those who watch Dying of Exposure knows from our Dimension 20 videos, talkbacks about episodes from Dimension 20, and Aaron Blaylock, who hasn't shown up a lot on Dying of Exposure, but was in a couple things about before the quarantine. Let's play of Pokemon Shield with Chimera before we couldn't collect at a house ever again.
I love playing in that game. It is an absolute delight. And
Low Armor Cast,
low AC.
The Low Armor Cast # Low AC. The branding is already in motion, so look for that. It'll have like some neat stuff to it. There'll probably be a Patreon. And by probably, I mean there definitely will be a Patreon, so that you can get some behind the scenes stuff to it. And then maybe you'll get lucky in some of those horror games that Ron runs might be a bonus content for Patreon listeners and stuff
Might
like
be.
that.
I do have quite a few one-shots.
Yeah.
That's a weird way to say that. I'm Ron for Steve in the roles we play. I'll play myself out. Happy Halloween.